So, this thing I want to talk about is still something I'm hashing out, but it's something kind of I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's kind of a deep topic that I still have a hard time understanding. And it could be something that's just, a mystery that we learn to accept. But I've been thinking about the concept of martyrdom and what it means and how it echoes through the world. But there seems to be this mysterious thing also, which I'll just call something like anti martyrdom, where when something evil is killed and its blood kind of stains all of us in the world. And, the best example I have, martyrs, there's many examples throughout history. I mean, you have St. Joan of Arc, you have St. Lucy, you have uh, St. Peter, St. Paul, all the apostles, St. Maximilian Kolbe. But there's an interesting thing that happened with Epstein, where in a case, I don't want to call him a martyr because obviously he wasn't a good man, but his death has also had this rippling effect where instead of it becoming something like what is explained in the church of like the seed of a church, it became a seed or like a spewing fountain of guilt. And so everyone is talking about the Epstein files, and there seems to be this kind of panic upon those who are suspected to be involved to wash themselves clean of this thing that he's been participating in, but it's almost like their hands are stained red, and so they can't get rid of that stain. Um, and first, I think there's an attachment here to the concept of, kind of like Rene Girard's theory of the scapegoat theory and mimetic desires, and, the concept of sacrifice of the clean lamb. And so in the biblical text, you see the ancient Israelis had this ritual where you would sprinkle blood on the goat and release him out into the wilderness. And he was kind of exiled. This goat was exiled out in the desert, and he carried the sins of the whole kind of tribe or society. And you would have, a clean lamb offering as a sacrifice to bring people together. And I feel like there's something attached to this concept of, scapegoating and sacrifice with the blood of martyrs versus the blood of, you can say, something that hasn't been given justice and seeking justice. As well as, you also have this kind of pattern in the story or the myth of Oedipus. And so Oedipus, you have a similar thing in a way where the king of Thebes, went to an oracle and was told that his son would, kill him and marry his wife or his mother. His son would marry his own mother, so his wife. And so he cast out Oedipus. Oedipus grew in a separate kingdom, through different events, kind of ended up back in Thebes, did end up killing his own father in battle, and took his father's wife as his own, realizing that it's his own mother, where he gouges out his own eyes and his mother kills herself. And there's this, I don't want to get too deep into the meaning of Oedipus itself, but there is some kind of theme of kind of like scapegoating and the through the oracles telling of what will happen with their son. It happens anyway, and kind of the guilt is so much for the mother that she takes her own life. And it's Oedipus takes out his own eyes. Later on, the city is struck with a plague, and the only way the plague can be cured is if Oedipus kind of exiles himself from his own kingdom, which is Thebes. And so it is a pretty interesting phenomena to think about, of how the death of an individual can have such a profound rippling effect throughout the whole world. And, the main point is that I don't necessarily want to focus on the evil, but I want to use this concept of, you know, Epstein's death, for example, as a way to understand of how martyrdom works in a way. I mentioned the opposites, right? So I mentioned already that Epstein was involved throughout the world, and um, there's different characters that people suspect could have been involved, different political figures and stakeholders and things like that of what he was involved in. But, one thing that is not denied from anyone is that there was a major kind of uh, trafficking ring of young girls and stuff that he was involved with. And it seems like there were other characters involved as well, which hasn't been totally revealed to us. And so you have this agent that works in secrecy. This is what the occult means. This is what the occult is, right? The occult is something, the occult, the word itself means something like, to operate in secret or be in secret. And so you have this thing that's operating in secret, and there was kind of a light cast on it for a moment, right? Either through the coming out of an individual that hasn't been involved, or some kind of evidence or video that people have seen, and it cannot be denied that there's this revelation of the evil that involves. And this is the same thing you can kind of think of. People say, like, when you kind of kick up a rock and you see an infestation of some kind of insects or something in your yard, or maybe underneath somewhere in your house, and there's no more of a denial that there's a problem. You might see a roach here and there and you can kind of scrub it off, but at some point when you find the main source of it, it becomes an issue. And so through the fear of everyone involved, the only way they can see as a way out if it is through Epstein's blood, right? But what's interesting is that I think a lot of people would have kind of liked to convict Epstein to death for the major injustices he has caused in his life. But there's a way that it happened where it's not, in a way, satiated society, right? He wasn't put to death for his crimes. He was put to death for the continual hiding or covering of what he has done. And so you have this interesting thing where his death was revealed. Even his death has in secret. We don't know all the details of it from the official story, so to speak. And a lot of people have theories and different things like that. But there's a mystery even in his death, right? There's you can say an occult-ish like mystery to his death. And so in a way, he's been sacrificed by his own group or leadership, or in the crew he's been involved with. And his death was to prevent the revealing of the full truth, right? It wasn't for the justice for the crimes he's committed. And we can see that a particular action, like wanting justice, like this particular ritual of justice, of putting someone to death or putting him in prison, it isn't good enough for any of us when it's not done for the purpose of what it's intended for. And so what I'm meaning by that is, there might be a group of people that, myself included, where they want Epstein to go to prison or face a death sentence, but it's specifically under the guise or under the purpose of serving justice for the crimes he's committed. And now he's received death, but it's still not good enough for us because it hasn't been, it wasn't for justice. It was for the continual secrecy of the whole operation. And in addition to that, we're also, you can say there's also kind of like this tension because the revelation of the whole truth that we're seeking for what is going on is not happening. And so you see this kind of scapegoating thing that I will say that happens where, in a way, everyone's sprinkling the sins of ourselves, of society, onto Epstein. But in a way, we're all partially involved in this prospect, right? Like we're all participating in the society, some of us unwillingly, some of us willingly, and we're trying to figure out how to get out of this. And so we have this new scapegoat that is Epstein, that society kind of sprinkles the blood on, right? It's his fault. He's attached to, this country, or he's attached to this thing. If only this thing could have changed. And it's kind of serving as a temporary binding unit. But at the same time, there's like a bubbling on the inside that's kind of, almost the early seeds of a revolution that seems that may happen. But if you kind of flip this image on its head, so if you're thinking about the martyr, you can have something very similar, right? Like you can have an individual like Saint Maximilian Kolbe. I'll use him as an example because I think that's one of the closest kind of martyrs to what happened. That's in a cell in prison, as a priest, has strived, from what we know, at least from his writings and what the church tells us, and other witnesses that were there, that he was a good man. He strived for goodness. He was a God-fearing man, and he also, in a way, his death was kind of in secret in some sense too, because it was down in this cell. But what's interesting is his rippling of the whole thing, at the outcome of the story, kind of that went out throughout the whole world, is not one that sprinkles guilt or feels like a quieting of a story in the same manner. His is kind of, there seems like there is a growth of something new. And so even if you look at his kind of life and what happened after the fact, is there isn't, we all know that the Nazis are bad and they've done bad things, evil things, but there is also a strain where his blood, because it was done under the seed of martyrdom, there's a purpose for the cleansing of sin, right? There's many people, there's, I think, some witnesses that with the German soldiers themselves that held him when they were injecting him with, I believe it was the cyanide, that didn't even want him to look at them as they were taking his own life, right? Because there's, the cleansing or the forgiveness or something like that can be very painful, like the cleaning of something, especially if you've been in rot for so long. And so his is, they couldn't even look at him in that way. And so you can see kind of how this death, like the sacrificial love for standing what you believe in, or the secrecy and trying to keep things hidden, of how they're both the same thing and they both do the same thing, but it almost has opposite results. And it's kind of why it is said that the martyrs are, like I mentioned earlier, the seeds of the church, is because a seed is kind of sacrifices its own being into the growth of a new plant, flower, fruit, whatever it may be. And they do, in a way, the same thing. They're in medieval culture, for example, there were whole towns and villages that were held together due to the tales and stories of a martyr of that particular like region or area. And so you had these, in a way, they're called cults of these different saints, because that's what they were bound together, but they were kind of all surrounding the meaning and bound together by the church. And so I'd be interested in what you guys think in the comments of why kind of a death of a person, when done in a almost like a ritualistic manner, of why it can have such a compounding and great effect. Last example I'll give, I'm not going to share any political opinions and stuff. It's just true for the fact that, for example, even the death of George Floyd had an echoing effect throughout the whole world. Now, you may say that it was fabricated and, there were actors involved or whatever. And to some extent it's true, but it could be true, I should say, like it could happen. But the purpose of it is that it's believable enough that, as people not in the interior of the event, of like being involved directly with the event, whether it was staged or wasn't, whatever it may be, or like within the protest or whatever it was, that it wasn't completely out of the ordinary for us, right? Like a lot of us treated it as like, yes, this is a problem, and joined in on the riots or some kind of input in it. And so you can see that, there's just an effect. There's kind of like this story now that it's involved with it. And shortly after George Floyd, you even had kind of like a shrine that people built to represent him where he was killed, right? You had these flowers, you had someone drew the chalk outline of where he laid. People started putting up signs that this was sacred ground. And so this is not abnormal in terms of like looking at the way that the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church treats its saints, but the saints were to a higher purpose. And so, yeah, I would be interested to hear in like the comments of what you guys think, or if there's any kind of reading or anything about this. I know obviously there's Rene Girard in terms of, scapegoating and how Christ himself fulfills both the role of the scapegoat and the innocent sacrifice. That kind of tore the world apart. It tore the temple. And, I'd be interested to think if anyone else knows maybe of a ancient story or myth or something that has a similar pattern to somebody like Epstein, like someone who was, murdered in secret that was guilty or something, but, his blood served as a stain upon their lives. I know, you have a lot of Edgar Allan Poe poems. I think there was one where like I think it was the Tattletale Heart, where he can constantly hear the beating of the heart and couldn't get it out of his head. So something like that, but in a more ancient tale. But yeah, this was kind of like a thought exercise out loud in a way, more than like communicating something that I found like a purpose of or meaning of. Maybe I found, I'm connecting these dots in a way according to what I've learned and listened to through listening to Jonathan Pageau and taking his classes within the symbolic world. But let me know what you think, and if you have an opinion of how or when even martyrdom really happens, like what is opposed to just the death of what else is required in order to cause a shockwave, I think is a better one than a ripple, in the world that kind of changes the trajectory of where we're going as a society or as a culture or as a country. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this little like thought exercise and thought it was interesting. Please like and subscribe on the video if you haven't, but also, before I go, obviously I haven't been releasing videos as often. I'm kind of still thinking about how I want to view this channel and what I want to create behind this. So I've tried to be very intentional of when I do go on. I don't have anything big or anything going on. Obviously, if you look at my other videos, there's only a few hundred views on them. And so still thinking about what to go. I really would like to focus more on the story aspects and like archetypes and how they affect our world. But, if you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe, watch my other videos, and I hope you'll tune in for the next one when I release it. So I hope everyone has a good day, and God bless.